September 10, 1931, New York City. The morning air around Grand Central Station felt normal, but something historic was about to happen. Offices above the station looked quiet from the outside, but inside one room sat the most feared mafia boss in America, Salvatore Maranzano. He believed he was untouchable. He was wrong. 4 men arrived that morning pretending to be government officials. They looked calm, professional, and confident. Maranzano trusted them enough to let them in. Minutes later, he was dead. That single moment changed the entire future of crime in America. And behind it all was one man, Charles Lucky Luciano. Lucky Luciano did not just rise in the underworld, he redesigned it. Years earlier, he was just a poor immigrant kid. He arrived in America as a child, unable to speak English, living in overcrowded tenements on the Lower East Side of New York. The streets were violent. Gangs controlled neighborhoods. Most kids in his position stayed poor or died young. But Luciano was different. He watched. He learned. He remembered. As a teenager, he saw something others didn't. Street wars brought attention. Attention brought police. Police brought prison or death. Luciano understood early that chaos was bad for business. While others fought over corners, he thought about systems. He became a trusted hitman and lieutenant for Joe the Boss Masseria, one of New York's most powerful mafia leaders in the 1920s. Masseria ruled with fear and tradition. He believed only Italians mattered. He refused to work with Jewish or Irish gangs. Luciano disagreed. Lucky Luciano believed money didn't care about ethnicity. Power didn't either. While Masseria lived in the past, Luciano built bridges. He worked closely with Jewish gangsters like Meyer Lansky and Arnold Rothstein. These men taught him something crucial. Crime could be organized like a corporation. You didn't need endless violence. You needed structure, partnerships, and planning. Then came Prohibition. In 1920, the United States banned alcohol. Overnight, drinking became illegal, but demand exploded. Luciano saw opportunity. Smuggling, distribution, protection, it all required coordination. This wasn't street crime anymore. This was logistics. Luciano and his partners made millions, then tens of millions. Bribes flowed to police, judges, and politicians. The system protected itself. Law enforcement looked the other way. But inside the mafia, things were still broken. By the late 1920s, 2 powerful bosses were at war, Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano. Their conflict, later called the Castellammarese War, turned New York into a battlefield. Bodies dropped in the streets. Business suffered. Luciano had enough. He secretly negotiated with Maranzano. He promised to remove Masseria in exchange for peace and equality. Maranzano agreed. On April 15, 1931, Luciano invited Masseria to lunch at a restaurant in Coney Island. While they played cards, Luciano excused himself. Gunmen walked in. Masseria was killed. The war ended, but peace didn't last. Maranzano declared himself boss of all bosses. He reorganized New York into 5 families, but placed himself above everyone. Luciano realized he had traded one tyrant for another. Worse, Maranzano planned to kill Luciano next. Lucky Luciano moved first. Using intelligence, deception, and perfect timing, he sent disguised hitmen into Maranzano's office. The knives and bullets ended Maranzano's rule. But Luciano didn't take the title of supreme boss. Instead, he did something revolutionary. he abolished the position entirely. Luciano created a governing body called the Commission. Each major family had a seat. Disputes would be settled by votes, not gunfire. Territories would be respected. Violence would be a last option. Crime became organized. Luciano was now the most powerful man in the American underworld, but he stayed in the shadows. He dressed well, lived in luxury, and moved quietly. He let others run daily operations. His system was strong enough to survive without him, and that strength would soon be tested. In 1936, New York prosecutor Thomas E. Dewey targeted Luciano. Unable to prove murder or racketeering, Dewey attacked him through prostitution charges. The trial was sensational. Witnesses testified. The media went wild. Luciano was convicted and sentenced to 30 to 50 years in prison. Most men would have fallen. Lucky Luciano did not. From behind bars, he still controlled the mafia. His structure worked exactly as designed. Money flowed, orders were followed. The empire survived without him. Then World War II changed everything. The U.S. government feared sabotage at New York docks. The mafia controlled the waterfront. The Navy needed help. And there was only one man who could deliver it, Lucky Luciano. From prison, he ordered peace on the docks. No strikes, no sabotage. The ports stayed secure. In return, his sentence was reduced. In 1946, Luciano was released and deported to Italy. He never returned to America, but his influence never left. From Italy and later Cuba, Luciano continued advising mafia leaders. Las Vegas grew. Narcotics expanded. His system remained intact. On January 26, 1962, Lucky Luciano collapsed and died of a heart attack at an airport in Italy. But his legacy lived on. He didn't just become a gangster. He invented the modern mafia. January 1942. New York Harbor. America was now fully involved in World War II, and fear was spreading along the East Coast. German submarines had already attacked ships in the Atlantic. The U.S. Navy believed enemy spies could sabotage the docks where weapons, food, and troops were being shipped to Europe. One explosion, one fire, could cripple the war effort. There was a problem. The docks were not controlled by the government. They were controlled by the mafia. Longshoremen unions, warehouse guards, trucking routes, all of it answered to organized crime. And at the top of that structure, even from inside prison, sat Charles Lucky Luciano. The government didn't like it, but they needed it. Luciano was serving his sentence in Dannemora Prison, a harsh facility near the Canadian border. Cold winters, isolation, a brutal fall for a man who once lived in luxury. But even there, Luciano stayed calm. He followed rules. He avoided trouble. He knew patience was power. Through Meyer Lansky and Frank Costello, Luciano still influenced decisions on the outside. The commission still functioned. Families still respected the system he built. The mafia did not collapse without him, and that proved just how brilliant his design was. When the U.S. Navy reached out, it was done quietly. Naval intelligence officers visited Luciano in prison. No cameras, no press, no written promises, just an understanding. If Luciano helped secure the docks, his situation might improve after the war. Luciano agreed. Within days, word spread across the waterfront. No strikes, no fires, no sabotage. Anyone suspicious was reported. Anyone threatening disruption was dealt with immediately. The docks became safer than they had ever been. Not a single major sabotage incident occurred. The Navy was satisfied. The government kept its word. In 1946, New York Governor Thomas E. Dewey, the same man who put Luciano behind bars, signed the order commuting his sentence. Luciano would be free, but only on one condition. He would be deported and never allowed to return to the United States. On February 10, 1946, Lucky Luciano boarded a ship and left America behind. He watched the New York skyline disappear into the distance, the city he conquered, the system he built, all of it now out of reach. But distance did not mean weakness. Luciano returned to Italy as a legend. Crowds greeted him. Politicians paid respect. Old allies welcomed him home. But Italy wasn't where the real money was anymore. America was. So Luciano moved again, this time to Cuba. Havana in the late 1940s was perfect. Close to the United States, corrupt officials, casinos, nightlife. No strong law enforcement pressure. Luciano set up operations at the Hotel Nacional. American mob bosses flew in quietly to meet him. It was there that Luciano reasserted control. Decisions about Las Vegas expansion, disputes between families, narcotics routes from Europe. All of it passed through Lucky. But visibility brought danger. The U.S. government noticed his presence in Cuba and applied pressure. Cuba complied. Luciano was expelled and sent back to Italy in 1947. This time, it was permanent. From Naples, Luciano lived like royalty. Expensive suits, fine food, beautiful homes. Meyer Lansky visited regularly, bringing cash and updates. Profits flowed in. The mafia thrived. Yet power slowly slipped. New leaders rose, men like Carlo Gambino and Vito Genovese. They respected Luciano, but they no longer waited for his permission. The world he built had grown beyond him. By the 1950s, Luciano was more symbol than ruler, an architect watching others live inside his creation. Still, his mind never stopped working. He advised, he planned, he warned. But time always wins. On January 26, 1962, at Naples International Airport, Lucky Luciano collapsed from a heart attack. He died instantly, 64 years old. A quiet ending for a man who lived in shadows and power. His body was later returned to the United States. Thousands attended his funeral in New York. Mafia bosses, old allies, silent observers. He was buried at St. John's Cemetery in Queens, back in the city he changed forever. Lucky Luciano was gone, but his system remained. The 5 families, the commission, the structure, the rules. Modern organized crime still followed his blueprint. He was ruthless, he was brilliant, he was dangerous. And more than anything else, he was the man who took chaos and turned it into order, criminal order. He didn't just rise in the mafia, he created it. New York City. When Lucky Luciano's coffin was lowered into the ground at St. John's Cemetery in Queens, something unusual happened. The men standing around the grave were not just mourners, they were the most powerful crime bosses in America. Men who rarely gathered in public, men who trusted no one. And yet they all came for one reason: respect. Lucky Luciano was gone, but everyone there knew the truth. every one of them was still living inside a world he had designed. Before Luciano, crime in America was chaotic. Gangs fought constantly. Leaders ruled through fear alone. Violence was the first answer, not the last. Police pressure was relentless because bodies kept piling up. The underworld was unstable and short-lived. Luciano changed that forever. His greatest achievement wasn't money, it wasn't power, it was structure. By eliminating the boss of all bosses system, he removed the biggest cause of internal wars. By creating the commission, he gave criminals a way to negotiate instead of killing each other. By dividing territory and enforcing rules, he turned gangs into corporations. Crime became professional. That professionalism allowed organized crime to survive for decades. Even when law enforcement finally understood what they were dealing with, it was too late. Luciano's system was already embedded in unions, construction, shipping, gambling, and politics. Las Vegas is a perfect example. When Luciano and Meyer Lansky saw the desert town's potential, it was nothing more than a dusty stop along a highway. Through mob money, casinos were built, hotels rose, and an entire city was born. Years later, when the mob was pushed out, corporations took over, but they inherited a machine Luciano helped create. Even today, when people walk through Las Vegas, they are walking through a legacy that began in the shadows. But Luciano's story is not a celebration. Behind the intelligence and vision was immense damage. His empire thrived on extortion, exploitation, and violence. Prostitution rings destroyed lives. Narcotics trafficking fueled addiction and death. Rivals, informants, and innocents were killed to protect profits. Luciano understood these costs and accepted them. That is what makes him such a complex figure. He was not a mindless brute. He was a strategist, a planner, a man who saw America's systems and copied them for his own purposes. He mirrored capitalism, management, and governance, but applied them to crime. In another life, with different opportunities, Luciano might have been a legitimate tycoon, a political leader, or a military strategist. His brain worked at that level. But history placed him on the margins of society, and he chose power over acceptance. Law enforcement eventually adapted. The FBI learned from failures, wiretaps, informants, RICO laws. The mafia was weakened piece by piece. By the 1980s and 1990s, many believed the era Luciano created was over. But systems don't disappear. They evolve. Modern criminal organizations around the world still follow Luciano's blueprint. Hierarchies, cells, shared profits, limited violence, quiet influence. Whether it's drug cartels, cybercrime rings, or international syndicates, the DNA traces back to the structure Luciano invented. That is his true legacy. Not just the American mafia, but the idea that crime could be organized, efficient, and sustainable. Lucky Luciano never fired the most shots. He never ruled with the loudest voice. He didn't need to. He built a machine that ran on its own, and machines, once built, are very hard to destroy. Charles Lucky Luciano died far from the streets where he rose, but his shadow still stretches across history. Not because he was the most violent gangster, but because he was the most intelligent one. He didn't just play the game, he wrote the rules.